Matthew, the first thing that strikes me here is that this is a mammoth task for anybody to do.
Well, yes. I mean, I've spent the last 6 and a bit years on it, working with a team of dedicated volunteers in the archive who give 1,000 hours of their time every year. And we're trying to sort out these diaries, 300,000 pages of them, which run from 1938 all the way to 1992. That cover the whole country, so that's for 52 years. And we're looking at doing this Kickstarter project to try and digitise the first 28,000 pages of these.
So where did they all come from? I mean, were they literally in boxes in a vault somewhere?
Yeah, so when I turned up 10 years ago to do my job, they were in a warehouse in giant wooden crates. And I spent several years going through all these boxes trying to find out what was in them. And, these particular diaries, they really stood out as being the outstanding thing.
And obviously up until that point, nobody had done anything with them at all then?
Well, they'd been part of our archive at the Royal Voluntary Service since 1958, when it got set up. But really, they'd just been sitting there and nobody had really worked out how to use them or seen how important they were in understanding the role of women and volunteers in society for most of the 20th century.
I mean, as a historical record, these are priceless, aren't they?
Well, absolutely. They were inscribed on the UNESCO UK Memory of the World Register in 2010. That means they're one of the most important documents in British history. They're on there with things like the death warrant of King Charles I and the Doomsday Book, for example.
So, I mean, some of this paper, it must be fairly fragile, isn't it? Has it stood the test of time?
A lot of it was not kept well when it was first created, and so it's on this very, very thin, almost tissue paper-like wartime paper. And so it's quite fragile and sort of the edges are starting to go on some of these things. So this project is all about trying to capture these really fragile pieces of paper and the information they hold before, they're lost forever, really.
And presumably at the time, when the ladies kept these diaries, they would never have seen them as a legacy for the future. They were just writing down what happened and what they thought.
Well, absolutely. Every month, these 2,000 women across the country are just writing down their everyday tasks. And having spoken to many of them over the years, they absolutely hated doing this task. But, when you tell them that they're now one of the most important documents in British history, they get quite excited.
Because, of course, at the time, it was called the Women's Royal Voluntary Service, wasn't it? And in 1938, the idea was that they trained them up to help with air raid precautions and things. But, I mean, as time went on during the war, I mean, they just did every job going, didn't they, with men away fighting?
Yeah, so the idea was that they were initially asked to recruit 30,000 women to help with the ARP services because obviously they knew men would go away to fight. Things like driving ambulances, being air raid wardens, helping in hospital supply depots. But they managed to recruit these 30,000 women within about 3 months, and women just kept coming. By the beginning of the war, they'd managed to recruit 300,000 women, and the idea was that every one of them had to have a job to do, and they found them a job to do. By 1941, the organisation has 1,043,000 members. That's 1 in 10 of every woman in the population of the country at the time.
I mean, professionally it's taken you over, but I would think to some extent it must have done personally because, sifting through these and knowing that there was somebody who was working to in the war effort and they wrote this all down, I mean, it must have taken you over totally, hasn't it?
You cannot help but get completely absorbed by the stories you read. I always say that these are ordinary women doing extraordinary things. These are ordinary housewives who, in a moment that Britain needed them, did their bit. They might not be fighting on the beaches, but they really are fighting in their homes and in their cities. They're doing things like collecting salvage. They're evacuating the children. They're distributing every single ration book. They're helping the injured and the dispossessed after air raids. They're clothing them. The number of jobs they're doing is just unbelievable. I think, if I added them up, we're talking about 60 or 70 different things they're doing. I mean, I looked at some reports from Birmingham just before I came on to speak to you. And, the WVS is helping the Lady Mayoress's clothing depot. And in August 1941, they're distributing 6,500 items of clothing to forces and civil defence forces, 2,000 garments to evacuated children, 9,500 items to air raid victims. You know, they're doing work which is making the home front bearable, you know, after air raids and things like this.
It's a terrific story, and talking of which, there must be one that is uppermost in your mind. Of all the things you read, whether it was a sad story, a funny story, or just somebody saying, I've had enough of this, I want to go home and put my feet up. There must be, can you just give me one little story that really resonates with you, Matthew?
I think the ones about the bombings are always sort of the most poignant, and there's one from the southeast of England where a lady very subtly says, there was an instant today and Hitler created us a new window in the side of our clothing store. Basically, the whole wall had been blown out.
That's absolutely perfect. That, if anything encapsulates it, that is it. It's a terrific venture you're involved with. We look forward to seeing it. Matthew McMurray, thanks so much for talking to us.
Thanks very much.